It is done. It is finished. Thankfully, West Virginia University has fired its head football coach, Neal Brown. I'm Carson Fox for Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. And I told you after that Texas Tech recap that I thought we were going to have some news come today. So I'm glad that I did that video recapping the Texas Tech game late last night. So you get me on back-to-back occasions. And the biggest sporting news of West Virginia football for all of this 2024 season, West Virginia is moving on from its head football coach who had been at the helm of the program since 2019. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to West Virginia University for making this move, to be bold, to have the cojones, and proving that you are a serious Power 4 Division I football program and want to be taken seriously in this crazy, chaotic NIL transfer portal world of 2024 college football. Because I think, just like I said with the video I made about a month or so ago when the news broke about defensive coordinator Jordan Leslie getting relieved of his duties, what was it, after the Arizona game? And I said in that video, and I'll repeat it for this video, I think just like Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to come out of the stage of denial and first acknowledge you have a problem before you are going to be able to analyze that problem and take corrective measures and steps to move forward and get past that problem. And just all of the news, all of the smoke where there wasn't necessarily fire over the course of the last month or so, what you could read between the lines on social media, in the cryptic newsletter that athletic director Ren Baker had put out, to just some comments that were just recently made on a podcast, I think this week, leadership or some sports leaders podcast or something, an interview. Just I as a fan, and I think the overwhelming majority of West Virginia fans would feel as if West Virginia University were slapping us in the face as fans if it didn't acknowledge and recognize the problem at hand with the head coach and the impact that he's making not only on the results on the field, and what I'm going to talk about is the end-all be-all for all of this, but the downstream effects of not only how that would affect enrollment, how that would affect game day revenue, NIL support, Mountaineer Athletic Club support, which are now, it sounds like, going to be merging with Country Roads Trust. West Virginia's place in this new Big 12 conference and conference realignment, and aligning to get to a potential super conference eventually, staying relevant ultimately in the top 50 to 60 programs within Division I, maybe even top 40, where a lot of Mountaineer Nation, including myself, thinks West Virginia should be, either should be or is. So for them to, I gotta say, it's going to take taking a step back before West Virginia takes a step forward. And we've seen this already with the Mountaineer men's basketball program. And that's what's so interesting about the timing of all this is, the proof, already, and West Virginia could go and lose all of the remainder of its men's basketball games. I hope that's not the case. I want to talk more about men's basketball with you, hopefully as soon as this week. But you already have some hard evidence with the way Darren DeVries in West Virginia had the biggest win in the last 7 years over Gonzaga, then finished that up, with an overtime performance against Louisville, who's an upstart, maybe top 25 program, and then Arizona. And you're going to take a step back, and that's why the worry of the lack of retention of current players and lack of future commits and so on and so forth. Yes, you are going to bite a bullet. $9.7 million, or however the money breaks down at the end of the day between his buyout and the assistant coaches, that is going to hurt. It's going to hit in the wallet, and that's the end-all be-all of where, follow the money, as what I always say with these videos. But you were going to continue to trend on a downward trajectory with Neal Brown as the head coach of the program. So you're losing more by keeping him than you are to bite the bullet now and try to move forward. And it takes a strong leader. It takes, in Ren Baker. It takes others in, donors, and even I don't know how much of an extent President Gordon Gee, who's on his way out the door in 6 months, how much of his voice played part in this conversation, but. Just the entire think tank brain trust that made this decision. Thank you. Thank you for doing this, because of all of the pain that us as Mountaineer Nation have taken over the course of these last 6 years, but predominantly this 2024 year, which is what West Virginia fans trusted in the climb for this year. This Texas-less, Oklahoma-less Big 12 with 7 home games, with so many seniors and upperclassmen who contributed to last year's team, that you thought if you put the money into, the investment into this year, sell those season tickets, contribute to Country Roads Trust, this, that, and the other thing, that things would have come together, and they didn't. It blew up. It blew up August 31st, and it just got worse and worse as the season went along, and at the end of it, West Virginia did not beat a team with a winning record, lost all of its games to teams with winning records, and West Virginia now has dropped a peg down especially from where they were last year, but they're right where they were 2 years ago, when West Virginia was contemplating then whether to fire Neal Brown. So you kick the can down the road. Thankfully, for Neal Brown's sake, the schedule played itself, and for West Virginia, because 2023 was a fun season. Just played out in the way that you played such an easy schedule that made. But I said all last season and into this that it would be 2 halves of one single movie, or one single play, however you want to skin the cat. Is that 2023 was going to bridge into 2024, and that is where we were going to have to judge this all in totality. So, before I get into all of the reasons, and I have quite a few for you here, kind of chronicling the legacy of Neal Brown, but why West Virginia had to make this move, I'm just a little bit confused. Some of the reactions that I'm seeing across social media by other, West Virginia media members. And, I'm not going to talk about alumni players or current players. Like, he's their head coach. He is who participated in their recruitment, their coaching, been a mentor figure. If you buy into somebody and they are removed from their position, and you have they have confidence in you, you have confidence in them, yeah, it's personally going to hurt. So I'm not including them as part of the discussion. But the West Virginia fans and these media members who I don't see I see a little bit more subjective than they are objective in this situation, like just feeling so bad in this situation, and kind of singing the praises of what Neal Brown. I think it is out of respect of the position. I think that is the case, is that West Virginia, fans and these media members, are feeling so bad for Neal Brown in this situation, respecting him as the head coach of the position. And, whether he's been, some of the things that I've heard, talking with, some of my West Virginia guys about this, or the developments in the hours thereafter. It sounds like he's taking this with grace, working with the administration, understanding, that this year was not acceptable, and trying to come up with as mutually beneficial of a parting of ways as possible, which I think is professionally and personally good for Neal Brown, because as I said in a previous video, that he's still young, he's still 44, he could go down. It was after the Baylor loss when the news was springing up about him in UMass. He could go down to UMass. He could go back to Troy. He could go back. He is a perfect fit for a G5, G6, however you want to call it, program, where it's not as cutthroat. It is not as die hard, win at all costs. and you could have a little more of the work-life balance that I think he's so desperately wanting. He's talked about this, especially throughout the off seasons and the many years now, of how much of a grind that this is on himself as the head coach, but everybody who's involved in a program. But that is what so irks me as a fan, and I can speak to this as a fan because that's all I am to this program. I'm not a media member. I'm not a player or assistant coach or something like this. I just I look at, and I'm stealing this from one of my favorite podcasters, and Ben Shapiro, who looks at some of other leaders in the terms of utility, like. And I see Neal Brown in this same kind of light. Is I don't need him to be this kind of like fatherly figure. I don't need him to be this mentor. Do I hope that he can emulate those characteristics, be a good citizen, not get himself into trouble, not, of course, like break any crimes or, break any laws to commit crimes or anything like that? Obviously. I don't want him to be any sort of a scumbag. No, but I care at the end of the day what happened on these 6 to 7 fall Saturdays a year, 12 games collectively from Labor Day through Thanksgiving and beyond, and bowl games. Like, I look at him as like a serviceable plumber. And like, I'll give you love your plumber and you appreciate if, he is a nice guy, but at the end of the day, if he's a crappy plumber, it's funny, crappy plumber. No pun intended there. But if he can't do the job, then you're going to change plumbers. You're going to move on to somebody else. And that is what it's come to with him, is that, like, yeah, you can love what he does between Sunday to Friday, but on Saturday, he just wasn't getting it done. The great personal example here. My wife and I, we have a contract with a company who does a lot of like bug spraying around our house because we live close to woods. And the guy who comes and hits us up, knocks on our door and talks to us every like 6 months to a year whenever we're supposed to renew is really nice. He's really kind. He's really generous. He's good in customer service and friendly. But you know what? And like, we appreciate that. And for some of the times that can be the deal breaker. That can be what hedges on the edge of whether, because you have such good customer service, you want to keep them. But if the service or the product was so unreasonably bad that doesn't make a difference at the end of the day, we aren't sticking with that service. And I feel like if you're watching this video, you can think about that in different ways of your life. Is you're not going to pay for something, pay for a product or service if the ROI, return on investment, is not there. And that is not what and even though Neal Brown was not getting paid like a top, and we've talked about this on this channel, like a top 40, I think he was right around 50 head coach in college football, you weren't getting that in return for what you were investing into him. With $100 million worth of facilities that were put in the 2020 season, for hiring him a general manager, hiring him an offensive coordinator when he claimed himself as the play caller, and that's what he considered his strengths. All of the investment that's been put into the Pushkar Center. I know that the NIL was held back because of Shane Lyons. But then the floodgates, opened up to more of an extent where you were kind of competitive in the same vein as some of the other brethren in the Big 12. And I know that West Virginia isn't one of these national leaders, but there are programs like Arizona State that I keep coming back to, or BYU, that are doing so much more with less. And when you get 6 years to prove it, which is so much longer than what, so many coaches have been fired so much earlier for so much less, that West Virginia was patient, gave him time, gave him, resources that it could give to him. And I just don't think that he ever, he wore out his welcome and just didn't take this so seriously to the point that it needs to at the Power 4 level. And I can't hear an argument against that. Or I can't, like, yes, he gave it his all. He worked, but just no, it was not good enough. Yeah, you can try, but if you're at the end of the day, your results are what they are. And then you just, like, some other things that are ancillary off the field, getting clowned by Pat Narduzzi before the 2022 backyard brawl of not understanding the importance of it. All this for one game, and Narduzzi just clowns him, thinking like, oh, you don't know about the backyard brawl? Like, he didn't get it. He didn't get it then. And then, following it up, and I know this is just really the icing on the cake. This isn't, I'm going to give you the cake here, but the things that the Freudian slips that happened this season, I cannot get over, and I feel like this was kind of the nail in the coffin to go along with everything else. Did they have fun? Was the weather nice? Like, that was looking into the subconscious of Neal Brown, bringing it to the conscious there, and just saying, like, what more do I owe these people than what I'm already giving you? And what he was already giving up to that extent was not good enough, and why after 6 years is over. We're 5-5, not 0-10. Like, this is finishing up the worst 6-season stretch since the 1970s, Bobby Bowden into Frank Signetti, when we know then thereafter started the modern age of West Virginia football, building and building and building under head coach Don Nehlen, taking it even to further heights under Rich Rodriguez, taking a step back for a few seasons under Bill Stewart, plateauing under Dana Holgerson, and then descending under Neal Brown. Like, I don't think he ever recognized through it all the damage that was happening to the West Virginia football program, to the point that it just became status quo. And I think that's what irks super fans like myself and so many others, and who wanted to, like, bash on people who were disappointed, were complaining, all these things. Like, you should cheer on the West Virginia players. You should cheer on the team. Like, I'm tired of these naysayers. And, like, I understand where you're coming from, but you're missing the whole entire point. West Virginia is not so far from competing for a national championship, for making multiple BCS bowl games, from having, a quarterback, and when you had the pieces with Will Grier there, being just a couple of plays in both Oklahoma State and Oklahoma from getting to a Big 12 championship, and perhaps even making a college football playoff that was 4 teams prior to 12. And it's just gotten further and further. So let me get into it, some of my reasons why. Now 18 minutes into this, why you had to fire Neal Brown. First and foremost, end-all, be-all, end of discussion, 37-35 in 6 seasons. That's just not good enough. That's not good enough. While failing to, and this is what I come back to in a lot of videos, is not thinking West Virginia needs to compete with the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, LSU when it's been good, Texas when it's been good, Oklahoma when it's been good, Penn State. It's not getting run out of the field, like how Neal Brown coached those games against Penn State, against Oklahoma, while being comparable, with your teams that are on your level, especially the teams that are your rivals. And thank God West Virginia under Neal Brown was 2-0 against Virginia Tech, but 0-2 against Penn State, 1-2 most important to Pitt, and then 0-1 in Maryland in a game that I'm still very cut deep from. That is inexcusable. That's what gets you fired, in culmination with the 6 seasons of mediocrity. 3-17 against ranked opponents. Anytime, very few times when West Virginia would reach a point where it was like, okay, here's here's a big game. Here's where we're ready to trust the climb. Here's where we're going to be taken seriously. It failed. West Virginia has failed to contend for 6 seasons for a Big 12 championship. And you could understand it in 2019. You could understand it in 2020. 2021, they took a major step back from what fans were, told was a climb. 2022, you thought it was over, and that probably should have been it in hindsight. After the way the backyard brawl ended, then following that up with the Kansas performance, not beating Iowa State, getting embarrassed by Texas A&M, or Texas Tech, getting embarrassed by Oklahoma. That should have, or not. I'm sorry, not Oklahoma. They almost beat Oklahoma that year, but definitely Texas Tech, Iowa State. Like, there were so many times there in 2022 that I think just the blame directly and should have been placed on Shane Lyons for how Country Roads Trust was not able to be hand in glove, just being way too much of a stickler, too much of a rules follower in the wild, wild west, cutting off your nose to spite your face, and holding the program back for what? So Shane Lyons should have been fired, and I just think the poor timing of all of that, with then Ren Baker coming in and deciding to retain Neal Brown, it should have been then and there. But you followed that up with a 2023 season like I talked about, but still failing to contend for a Big 12 championship. So all of the eggs were put into this basket. So to finish 6-6 is unacceptable. Now talking about some ancillary things is just the drop in recruiting. Go back and look at some of the 2019, 2020, 2021 classes, and you can see very few players that were with this program for, multiple, all 4 years of their eligibility, and what really did they necessarily contribute to this program. I don't want to really get into the specifics because I feel like we could be here all day. And recruiting is an inexact science. It's not perfect. And I don't want to steal my thunder for my show talking about early signing day on Wednesday, but I'll just give you this. I've never seen West Virginia receive commitments from so many 2-star players over the last 3 cycles. And players whose other schools that they're considering consist of very, very few Power 4 programs, let alone good Power 4 programs. And I think it comes back to a failed NIL/high school recruitment strategy, which falls not only on Neal Brown, but on Trey Nair, the director of high school recruiting. To a lesser extent, just because he's been here for only about a year and a half, and more of his his job responsibilities being on transfer recruiting and general manager Drew Fabianich. But for the wins that he had on Beanie Bishop this past year, I think are negated by Garnet Hollis Jr. and Jaheim Joseph and others that he's brought in this cycle. So the roster management brain trust has not been very good. It wasn't very good prior to Drew Fabianich coming in, and I don't think it's getting all that much better. Which, when you don't contend, I talk about this all the time, when you don't win, when you don't contend for conference championships, and thirdly, not putting players into the NFL, getting them drafted, and in 6 seasons, West Virginia's had 4 players drafted to the NFL, you're not seeing the kind of foundation being laid to an attractive program to high school talent. Penn State is owning the state of Pennsylvania and have had the entire time of Neal Brown's tenure. That's not getting better. Ohio State is still a behemoth nationally. Teams from the West Coast are coming over to Ironton, Ohio to get recruits, on the Kentucky-Ohio border. It has never been harder to get top high school talent, and West Virginia's number of 4-star players have becoming smaller and smaller in total volume, and their number of 2-star players are going higher. So the correlation of the effect is the lack of interest in West Virginia football, which is partially, and nobody wants to talk about this, due to the Big 12 conference. I think I've heard one or two West Virginia podcasters talk about this. But the devastation of failing in a dozen years to win a Big 12 championship in a westwardly expanding conference with an eastern outpost in West Virginia. West Virginia is misconferenced, but to not win enough, not to contend for and win a conference championship. And now in 6 years, Colton McKivitz, Tony Fields, Dante Stills, and Zach Frazier are your only 4 players drafted. I think I saw a tweet over this Thanksgiving holiday that Charlie Huff and Marshall have 14 players currently in the NFL. I know West Virginia has players like a Beanie Bishop who weren't drafted, but are now playing for NFL franchises. So that, and Bryce Ford Wheaton being another one with the New York Jets. I think David Sills is still hanging around in the NFL. Will Greer, but you got a program in Marshall who you don't consider even worth playing in state, but you're putting these few of players into the NFL. Under Dana Holgerson, it was in double figures over 8 seats. I think it was over 20. So your lack of recruiting, the lack of obvious development that is having because of these first time assistants at the Power 4 level, but also just coming down from the top in Neal Brown. And what I'll go to into this is the lack of defensive and offensive identity. This has just become it's not a team, it's just a collection of players all on the field together at the same time. Like, I do not understand what to this day. I got a glimpse of it. I think I kind of understood it last year. When the offensive identity was running the football, being one of the top rushing offenses in college football, and then taking deep shots down the field. But without those deep shots this year, it just looks mishmashed, disorganized, and with so many senior leaders, and the narrative being throughout the spring and into the summer that West Virginia felt so confident with its ones that they were able to work in some new players, try some different things, and then to look as vanilla and bland, basic, team of offensive lack of creativity, and to use, I talked about this in my last video about Texas Tech, of how much time of possession and clock pre-snap in an accelerated game now because of the way that stoppage clock doesn't stop until 2 minutes, especially after a first down. But you use so much time, it holds back your offense from the ability to put up points, to create yards, to pad statistics, which then makes you more attractive to high school recruits, to transfer portal recruits, getting players into the NFL. When they see offensive numbers like teams that are putting up at Iowa, and granted, I know, Caleb Johnson, awesome running back, that is the mold. I use that in a lot of my videos, is I feel as if Neal Brown was trying to create West Virginia's offense to be more like Iowa. And I don't know how, and if you're a coach in your right mind, you want to associate your offense with Iowa. Iowa personifies just boring, bland, lack of now they are able to back that up with hellacious defense. And that's where I feel like Neal Brown has missed the point throughout his tenure. And I don't think it had anything, maybe, but it didn't have anything to do with the firing back all the way in 2020 of Vic Kenning, because Jordan Leslie came in 2020 and West Virginia had the number 2 scoring defense or total defense in the country that year. When it had Drayshawn Miller on one side, Tyke Smith in the back, the back safety, and Nick Troy Fortune on the other side. You got to have Jimmies and Joes. You got to obviously have X's and O's. And I've chronicled this, how much, with especially this year, with how much better Jarrett Bartlett has been at Cincinnati, getting out of the bandit position under head coach Jordan Leslie, just repeating the insanity of doing the same thing over and over, not changing the coaches, not changing the scheme, not changing anything, and expecting different results. I think that was a failure for this year. If West Virginia had even with the downgraded offense, if it had even a competent defense, and that's all I was at when I did my season preview video for you all. I said if West Virginia's defense could be just as good as last year, not even better, but the offense could get better, scoring over 35 points per game while giving up somewhere in the ballpark of in between like 26 and 30, West Virginia's okay. It's probably going to win 8 games. Definitely win the Pitt game. Maybe you I don't know. So many of them were blowouts, but you definitely win the Pitt game. I just think that so much of this season could have gone differently if you had more confidence in your defense to be able to stop a nosebleed. I mean, they made Eli Holstein look like the reincarnation of Joe Burrow on September 14th. The best Pitt quarterback that it's had. Definitely since Kenny Pickett, but even go as far back as Rod Rutherford. That's how they made Eli Holstein look weak too. How good they made Rocco Becht, Avery Johnson, guys like Sawyer Robertson and Baron Morton, and just especially Morton in the second quarter, breaking West Virginia's will. And that's what I can't take more of. And I think that is unfortunately what Neal Brown breeds from this lack of not attention and maybe it is attention and focus and like buy-in and intensity around the job and the profession that then goes down to the players. It's just being gritty, being mean, being physical. College football is a dirty, ugly game. Like, if you want it to look like, fencing at the Olympics and, we're taking off our headgear and we're shaking hands and bowing and all of that jazz, that is not college football, y'all. Did you watch the games that happened over this rivalry weekend? How many fights broke out across college football? From Notre Dame and USC to Florida, Florida State, Michigan, Ohio State, and so many others in between. It is nasty. It is brutal. And you're never going to win any, arguments, spats back and forth between Mike Locksley and Maryland. You're not going to win any sympathy points because you played morally. That it is a take no prisoners, win at all costs approach. And it's, spitting ugly sometimes. You got to be rabid. You got to want to take the other person's, head and, bury him in the backyard nameless. And that is unfortunately goes, I think, against the grain of Neal Brown's character, which, I can respect on a personal level. I understand, you probably really like Neal Brown to be like your son or daughter's camp counselor, or a teacher, or Sunday school teacher, or just think of all the other things that you would have kids involved with. I'm sure that parents really liked him, especially with all the family days that he tries to incorporate in, the fifth quarter program that he's installed and trying to professionally develop players, the alumni, the good graces of the alumni, of wanting to welcome them back into the fold, and all of that is important, and that is why Nick Saban is the greatest head football coach of all time. And it took finally to get to the professionalization of college football in the world of NIL, where everyone's doing it. That forced him out and wanting to retire, is that you love what Neal Brown brings, again, Sunday to Friday, and all that he did organizationally, and wanting the players to bond together, to have it more of a, I don't want to say business-like atmosphere, but that they can recognize and acknowledge that this is, just a game, just a sport. Like, this isn't, going to be for the rest of your life kind of thing. And that is important, and I appreciate that. But if there was a switch, there's no on switch to Neal Brown as a coach, I feel like, that can get his players so charged up, so juiced, that they want to go and they want to rip somebody else's head off. I see that very few times in games, that there's just a degree, and like, you have your certain few who I'm painting with a broad brush here, because there are case in point. It's like, if I'm choosing someone on my team to, a duel to the death, Zach Frazier is going to be one of my first picks. You want somebody like that who can just rip somebody else's head off. But that's what the kind of like mentality as a football team collectively that we just haven't seen from West Virginia in so long, and isn't going to get there. And that is what I think, you hear this in professional, organizations all the time, is when there's a change in leadership. Neal Brown was the anti-Dana Holgorsen. So now the next head coach will be an anti-Neal Brown, and we're going to pendulum swing and back and forth. And I just hope that there can be a delicate balance, that there can be, this, finding of a brand, finding of an identity, who you want to be as a program, cultivate that, but not so much that you're desperate for the players and going to pay them out higher than market value NIL dollars, because you need the players more than the players need you. I hope that the next head coach can create a culture where there's buy-in, where there's obviously, a trusted, development plan to get these players from high school to where they are as seniors to be better, each year precipitously better, to the point that then they're putting out more players into the National Football League, contending for conference championships, and still having a lot of the same things within the organization and off the field. Everything that they do with the, WVU Children's Medicine, everything, again, what they do with the fifth quarter program, what they're able to do in some of the down times of the off season and create that kind of family atmosphere. I love all that. But then when it comes time between, August and November to, strap them up, I don't care how you respond in press conferences, if you're short, to the point, you're not real, friendly around the edges, if you're more of a porcupine than you are a teddy bear, that's Bill Belichick, who's the best NFL coach of all time. So I don't need that. I need a great plumber. I need someone out there who is going to come in, identify the problem, and is going to fix it, and it be better than before, than when it was broke. Because right now, this program's broken. It really is. And it needs someone with a strong leadership, strong character, buy-in to West Virginia football that can also get buy-in, oh man, it's hard these days, out of Gen Z players, out in an NIL transfer portal world, where we want you, but you have to want us. And I don't think there's enough of that. I think there's a lot of people who are glad, on Saturdays to be, showing off their uniforms, taking selfies, videos, like being football players more than they do like playing football. And that's what I want more of within this program, and then finding them in high school recruiting, to do some things in high school recruiting that are different than what has been the protocol, relying on these summer camps that West Virginia has as being your end-all be-all to all of your high school recruiting for so many years. You got to go beyond that. You got to get back into, I feel like, your roots here in the mid-Atlantic states, like Don Nehlen has said, everywhere within a 5 to 10 hour radius, but then also some pockets in the South. But not being afraid to try and dip back into secondary and tertiary markets that may have not been as fruitful in 2012 whenever West Virginia joined this conference, but you can try again. then like it's going to take a home run hire. And that's why, I hope that behind the scenes, Ren Baker has been working the phones, working his Rolodex, talking to, he's hit home runs, I feel like, with hires in the women's basketball coach, the men's basketball coach. Now it's his chance to go make his mark on the football program. The hiring of, or I don't know if he hired or he was like in his first year, Dan Stratford as the men's soccer coach. The transition from Randy Mazey to Steve Sabins with the baseball program, but that now it's time for football, and basketball may seem to a certain extent a little more ahead of schedule, so you're hoping that you can I think that's what, and I don't want to use any more of this video. I want this video to strictly be about Neal Brown, but I know then the next logical question becomes what does West Virginia do now? Who does it interview? Who's on the short list? Who's going to ultimately be the hire, and how quickly? Like, I think the hire has to be definitely before Christmas. I would hope that it would be by next Friday. So what is that? December 12th? Something like that, because, and this is why I said that you should have done this move a week ago after the UCF game, because this Saturday game against Texas Tech was inconsequential. You're now, 72 hours away from the early signing day for the fall 25 class. You're now 8 days away from the transfer portal opening for the current players. So every hour, every day that passes in which West Virginia doesn't have a head coach, determinations on assistant coaches aren't made yet, that you're going to have more and more stress and anxiety put on the current players, put on the 25 commits, and you know that there's going to be rampant tampering over all of these players. And it's going to have to be fast. That a new coach comes in, analyzes the roster, analyzes the NIL strategy, and hopefully that they're able to put something together that you don't completely lose some of the core for 25. I disagree that I think if the right fit coach comes in, can identify and create this type of roster management with NIL as an incorporated strategy, go out there and implement it not only for this incoming high school class, transfer class, and retention efforts, that West Virginia isn't so far down into the dumps that it can't still be competitive, I feel like, even out of the gate with, two easier opponents right off the bat, an FCS, a G6, and then having the backyard brawl at home. And then we'll see how the Big 12 schedule, figures itself out for next year, and who they play on what ascending weeks, where the bye week games are going to be as part of that, so on and so forth. So that's what I think is Ren Baker do his due diligence on all of the interviews, on all of the conversations, talking with the donor base, who's going to ignite this program, blaze it the hottest, but going to be able to sustain. That this isn't more, it can be a short term, or, if Jimbo Fisher, or I can't believe I'm saying this, and I hate that I have to even entertain this idea, and I will dislike this decision, and you'll get that video from me whenever it happens, but since it's being talked about online, let's talk about it. Rich Rodriguez, if it's more of a short-term decision for a long-term game, I'm okay with that too. So I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments or read your comments. I'll try and respond back to you, as best I can throughout today and tomorrow. So love your feedback, how you ultimately feel about this decision for West Virginia to move on from Neal Brown. Are you celebrating it? Are you a little bit more dejected? And is it, again, because of out of respect for the head football coach position? or as Neal Brown himself. And whenever you say that, I want you to remember how you feel if you went to if you went to 2021 Maryland, if you went to 2022 Pitt or 2024 Pitt, or if you went to the 2023 game against Oklahoma State. There's so many other case in points. It's just like when you think of like how bad you want to feel for Neal Brown, think back to all of the times how dejected you felt after a West Virginia loss. And his comments of, did they have fun? We're at 5-5, not 0-10, and how unserious he was taking things at time when you're shelling out, hundreds of dollars or more in the WVU game day experience. So think about that. If you like this video, I'd love for you to like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube. Love to have you as subscribers to my channel. We're going to have a lot to talk about between this new hire, the way the roster comes together for 2025. We're still going to have to probably talk about a bowl game. I don't know how we're going to be talking about a bowl game, but probably we are. And then I'm going to get into basketball because there's a lot to like about this basketball program so far for this season. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. And I'll be back later this week, definitely, to talk about early signing day, whether we're talking about one commit or we're talking about over 20 still. So thanks for tuning in. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.